Today I'm joined by Aniket Chauhan. Aniket, thank you for talking with me.
Thank you for having me, man. Appreciate it.
So, when you and I have talked off the air, I've learned a little bit about your passion for cybersecurity, and I think this is a really interesting passion and skill set to have in today's world, given how incredibly pertinent it is, how everyone's getting hacked, and this is just it's the mainstream thing. So, let me just start at the core level. What actually does cybersecurity mean?
So for me, like cybersecurity means just kind of just the defense of like all of these like systems that you have. I mean, right? Like you go to any type of company, you go to any type of university, you go to any type of organization, anything like that, right? You're gonna have systems, certain systems that operate. And cybersecurity, for me at least, is the defense of all that stuff. To me, it kind of feels like I'm the police of the internet. You know what I'm saying? Which I think just when you put it in that way, it makes it so freaking cool. Because I think like when I stepped into my first cybersecurity class, I think it was my junior year of high school. I stepped into my first cybersecurity class, and I remember just learning about how all these systems work, learning about just networking in general. And I just think for me, like I was just like watching, like just doing that stuff because I think until then I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Like I was like a junior of high school, I was like I have no idea what I want to do. You know what I mean? I had some things I was interested in, but I just couldn't narrow it down to one. And so I think like when I stepped in that cybersecurity class, like sure, some of the stuff was like hard, don't get me wrong, but like I loved it. You know what I mean? Like I just loved every aspect about it. So I think for me, it's just like the defense of just systems. That's it.
So why does that matter? Think of it from, let's say you're a CEO, right? You're in a boardroom and people say, look, we could, there's a small chance we'll get hacked and it'll be problematic, but it'll be really expensive to pay for all these people. Or we can focus on just marketing our new products. Like why would it matter to actually invest in cybersecurity?
Yeah. I mean, I totally hear the marketing point from the CEO standpoint, but like also at the same time, man, you get hacked, what are you gonna do? You know what I mean? You lost a lot of like that stuff that you already have. That's the basis of your company. What are you gonna do then? You know, I get it might be expensive, but at least your company's protected at the end of the day, right? Like, just I don't know. If you look at it from a logical standpoint like that, it makes all the sense in the world. I think to me at least, for you to at least hire some type of a cybersecurity team.
I want your opinion then. Is it the case that cybersecurity is increasingly valuable because of an increase in hacks, or is it just getting more publicity? Is it just something that's in the mainstream, but really we don't need to be as concerned about, and maybe we're blowing it out of concern?
I think it's more valuable, and I'll tell you why. Because I think it's more valuable because I think that as these hacks keep going on, there's going to be different types of hacks as well as time goes by. You know what I mean? Hackers are only I feel like are only going to get smarter and smarter as time goes by, and I just think because of that, like it's really important for us to like make sure that we defend our systems and make sure we defend everything that we have. You know what I mean? There are people out there right now that are losing their identity. You know, like every day, the stuff like that is happening. You know, and I feel like it only increases the value of just cybersecurity in general. It's like cybersecurity. I think is just such an important thing for us to have, and it's so overlooked. I think in our society sometimes. And I just really just look at it that way. It just pisses me off, man, because I'm like, yo, like this thing is so freaking important. You know, and it's like I just think it's a very important thing. I look at it in that mindset. Yeah.
Is it just something that you see as purely technical, right? You hire this person, you have the best encryption softwares, those kinds of things, or is it something more also high level, like setting your passwords well and using, multiple characters and longer passwords and social engineering, right? Unpack a little bit about if there's any facet that cybersecurity plays in that's not purely technical engineering.
Yeah, I mean, like totally, like you said, like it's the social engineering aspect is huge. You know what I mean? Like one of the first things that I learned in that cybersecurity class was like make sure to set a strong password. You know what I'm saying? Because there's so many people nowadays that said just easy passwords that can easily just be hacked, just like that. You know, in an instant, just like that. They're all that stuff that they had is just gone. It can just be stolen, just like that. If you log in, right, you can just log in really easily with those like with that easy ass password. That's the thing, right? So that's why like I just say that like it's the social aspect I feel like is just as important as the technical aspect of it. You know, and you don't even have just have the social aspect, you have like the hardware aspect of it too, right? Like where you learn about how the computer system works and you can see like what type of engineering in that system is the most efficient to make sure that whole thing is like working in the most efficient way, you know? I feel like it just has multiple different aspects about it, not just the technical side. Yes, it's important, but all this other stuff is just as important as that other stuff.
I know we're a little early in our conversation, but I want to pick your brain now. If if you were to be asked one thing, if you were to recommend one thing to the average person that would make their technology, their computer, whatever they use, that would make their lives more quote cyber secure, what is that one thing you would suggest people do as you continued learning about these systems?
Yeah, yeah, just kind of watch what you have like on the internet. Basically, there are a lot of like shady links that can pop up out of nowhere, and just kind of just it's important to kind of just focus on like, oh yeah, this seems a little bit shady, kind of just steer past it. And again, like with this passwords thing, keep a strong password. Make sure your stuff is secure, because at the end of the day, that's very important. Hackers can easily just hack in to a very like simple password, so it's very important. Just keep a strong password, and I think just in general, just make sure to like keep that like just be smart. I think on the internet, try not to click anything just because it says, oh, pop up, click here. You know what I mean? Just know, obviously, just know to like what to click and what not to click. That's what I'd say.
I'll tell you what, strong passwords are easier said than done for a lot of people. It took me a long time because you might think, okay, let me write down my passwords. And if you're following all the suggested rules where none of them match, they're all 12 characters and they have some symbols and all these kinds of things, you're obviously not memorizing them. So if you're doing all of those things, then it gets really challenging. It's cumbersome to dig through all of your pages of passwords. Or if you get a password manager, which those are really nice. I've finally gotten into using that. Um, Even then, you still got to move all of your passwords over. And what if you lose the password to your password manager, right? So it's not always simple.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point when you say that. Absolutely. I just think I keep all my passwords like in my notes on my
Hmm.
phone. That's what I do. But like I totally understand what people are saying with that. Like it's definitely not an easy thing, but it's important to keep your stuff safe. That's all I preach that a lot to people, It's just important with that, Cybersecurity is just it's only a field that's just gonna keep growing as time goes by, with the evolution of this AI and just all of these like hackers I feel like are only just gonna get smarter now. So I just think it's important to kind of just be mindful of it and just be mindful about that and just remember like, oh yeah, like I gotta like just remember like keep my stuff safe.
Right. It's one of those things. It's almost like locking your doors at night. It just becomes habit. No one is worried that they have to spend the energy to lock the door because they're so used to it. I guess in this age of continued technological growth, that's just going to become the norm. Everyone's just, oh, I have a password manager or I have it stored somewhere and they're not all matching, and that's just normal. So I'm sure it'll just normalize over time. But when you and I have talked before this conversation, you've mentioned offensive cybersecurity. And I wonder, we keep talking about cybersecurity as if it's defensive, right? It's defending what you own, it's protecting your accounts, it's hiding your passwords. What does it actually mean for something to be offensive cybersecurity? Isn't that kind of a juxtaposition?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is a big. I mean, there's in cybersecurity, like it's broken down to like offensive and defensive cybersecurity. So like offensive cybersecurity details kind of like with like ethical hacking, and I think this is a really cool thing that some companies do. I've heard like I know like Google has done this before. I think some other like big and like companies have done this, but like basically what they do is like if you can kind of exploit sometimes something wrong in their like system, essentially try to basically like find a bug in their system, right? They will actually like pay you like a certain amount of money for that.
Yeah, I've seen Facebook post that on their site before.
Yeah, yeah. And that's an example of like offensive cybersecurity because like that's kind of like just exploiting that system, that problem, that bug that's in your system. And then you kind of just learn like, oh shoot, like we didn't catch this bug, right? Like us as employees. So it's important that someone else found this so that we can fix this now, right? Because that could have been a potential problem that hackers could came in for.
I see. So offensive cybersecurity is less of the act of the white hat hacking, the good hacking or whatnot, but it's more of the, if I hear you right, the response to that or the framework that allows for that, to where it's not that hacking each other is cybersecurity. It's that with the use of that hacking, it allows for you to know where your vulnerabilities are. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that's basically detailing of like ethical hacking essentially. And like in the cybersecurity class that I took in high school, like our first class we learned about computer systems, the second one we learned about like networking. I didn't end up taking the third class because of COVID year, but like The third class was detailed was ethical hacking. And so I think the big thing that they were going to do is that they were going to try to see if they can exploit any weaknesses in like our school server or something, so that like technicians working there can like kind of fix that kind of thing, which I think is just super cool. I think that's a really cool thing that companies and just school districts and stuff do, is that they allow like kind of like just try to see if you can find some type of a bug. You know, you can find a bug, you find a bug, you exploit it, and
Hmm.
then you just have those like those technicians that are working right now. You can just have those technicians just like work on that bug, fix that bug, and that's it, right?
It makes me think of open source. Let's just say this: for those who don't know, what is open source software versus closed software, and how does that relationship relate to what we're talking about now? How does something being open source allow for this cybersecurity?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the open source, I think, in my opinion, just makes it kind of seem like it's an easier kind of aspect to access. Well, a closed source is more of like private details, kind of like how in a class, how like when you're coding, there's a class, there's public and private aspects about it. That's what an open and closed source kind of remind me.
So then with open source, then from the way I understand it, you can then, like you're saying, allow for offensive cybersecurity, if you will, because people could, they could, yeah, I mean, it allows bad actors to hack into your stuff easier in some sense because they can see your code, but it also allows, if you have a strong enough community, it allows for a lot of good actors who you might be paying or they might just be volunteers to see your code and find the vulnerabilities ahead of time. Whereas if it's privatized to your company, sure, no one can expose it and exploit it because they can't access it. But if they ended up finding a way, you wouldn't have had this huge community that was making it stronger and stronger.
Exactly, right? Like when you look at it that way, it's like I think offensive cybersecurity in a sense is just as important as defensive cybersecurity. I know we look at cybersecurity as more of a defensive aspect, and it
Mm-hmm.
really is. But like I think the offensive aspect is almost just as important, because say you didn't have those offensive like cybersecurity, like I guess like component, right? Like there would be a lot of systems that could just easily just be hacked, just like that, just because of like they just didn't know that this system was exploited. So many companies I feel like have just been saved because of this offensive cybersecurity aspect. And I think just when you look at that, that just makes like this whole thing like a lot better, right?
What do you think the future of this, I don't know what to call it, this global phenomenon of hacking and ransomwares and things, assuming it really is growing and it's not just PR, what do you think the future looks like? 10 years out, 30 years out? It's really hard to say the farther you go. Do you see a world where governments actually start to regulate this, well, at least those that haven't already, and require cybersecurity restrictions? Do you see a world where corporations they just keep getting hacked because it doesn't affect their bottom line in a positive way, at least in the short term when they're planning these positions and employees and all these kinds of things? What do you think the trend is, if you have any thoughts, for the future of this I don't know what you call it, this industry?
I think like again, I think it's only going to keep growing. Cybersecurity is only just going to get bigger, and it's a very in demand field already as it is, right? So I just think that like because of that, like it's important, I think, just to keep having it, you know. And it's only just going to grow, right? And like I think like especially like you said, I think governments now that haven't been regulating it, I think definitely in the future at least need to get some type of aspect to regulate it. Because I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are willing to, hack anything, you know. And I think because of that, like because they're willing to hack anything, it's very important to make sure that you keep your stuff protected. Because it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. I feel like as society like goes by, you know what I mean. With the evolution of AI now,
Mm-hmm.
with the evolution of how big the tech industry is growing, like it's only just going to keep getting larger and larger. As you build up more, it's just you have more threats, right?
Yeah, I can envision a world where I don't know how feasible this is, but I can imagine you could take a Chat GPT 7, pick a number, and you could input, let's say, an open source code set, like an open, like your company's code base, and then it could just find vulnerabilities for you. I could imagine that being a thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, Chat GPT can do stuff like that. I feel like already, kind of in a sense. I mean,
Right.
not like that, but like, I mean, if you ask Chat GPT to code you a function about like kind of finding something, it could code you something just like that, right? So with AI being like that smart, I feel like it's only going to your vulnerabilities are only just going to be like they could be that easy to find just like that, right? So
Right. Which is a double-edged sword because that means you could potentially patch it super easily, or if you're not utilizing your resources effectively or governments aren't requiring you to, then only the bad actors will be doing that, and then you're going to have serious problems.
right, yeah, exactly. That's the thing with cybersecurity. It's a double-edged sword, right? That offensive defensive component, double-edged swords, but I think they both are beneficial to society. That's the way I look at it.
Well, with cybersecurity, most people, when they hear that word, I would guess, they think about the technical aspect, as we mentioned at the beginning. And when you think about anything technical, you think computer science. So tell me if I'm wrong, but you're a computer science student, correct?
Yes, yeah, 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 yeah.
So how have you managed that landscape? I'm curious now because you mentioned COVID and going to classes with that. How have you managed, even beyond cybersecurity, just the university and the computer science engineering type world in that landscape where it's already known that there are high suicide rates and mental health issues and things like that. But just to totally pivot here, how do you handle your time doing this kind of rigorous study to learn about all these fascinating things that you're talking about in the world of cybersecurity?
I think then that's like an excellent question. Like I feel like not a lot of people ask that type of those types of questions because again, like I think mental health is like super overlooked, I think, right now in our society. But I think that's an excellent question. So like again, like this stuff is just it's very interesting to me. But like you said, it is very rigorous and it's a lot, it's in depth, it's deep. I think it's just important for you to kind of just break it up if you can, you know what I mean? Like for my internship right now, I had to start like coding in a totally new language that I had never learned before in my life, you know? And so because of that, like I had to learn some of that stuff on the go, like on the job. And like I just know that number one, it's okay to ask for help because I think I struggled a lot with asking for help. And then number two, just break it up. Like you don't have to know everything immediately. And just practice. I'd say practice, practice, practice. Keep focusing on your stuff. Keep being on top of your stuff because all this like this engineering, computer science, cybersecurity, all these kind of like aspects, it just requires a great deal of just focus and just practicing. That's it. You know, just making sure you know you're on top of your stuff. You know.
Yeah, I think back to whenever we were young, we always learned, the basic maths, right? Multiplication tables, things like that. And everyone always said you have to know this because it's going to build. And math really does build in a way that something like history is more memorization, right? Uh, do you see that happening in the same way in your computer science studies? And more broadly, if you see that happening, do you ever fear for those who fall behind, particularly at university level or, God forbid, during a pandemic when they can only reach people by email every few days? Have you ever had any experiences like that, or am I really just missing something here?
You're not missing anything, man. Absolutely. Yeah, I've had those experiences for sure. Definitely. I mean, I think especially like when you first start coding, it's definitely like a struggle, you know? Like it's a big struggle. Like they literally I remember I walked into like the CU computer science class, the first class, 1300, and like literally like they literally in the syllabus even said like we know coding can be scary, but make sure like you utilize your resources. So it's like it's super important for you to just utilize those resources, office hours, all that stuff. Office hours help with like other students, stuff like that. Like it's just super important to utilize that stuff. And I just think like it can be frustrating. I feel like everyone has a love hate relationship with coding, and I think in general I don't blame them because I feel like I at times do as well. But you know, I just think like just keep practicing. Like I said, don't give up on it because I mean it will like as you keep doing it, it'll get easier. You know. And don't be discouraged if you make mistakes because everyone, I think, when they first start out, make a bunch of mistakes. You know,
Right.
like no one was perfect. You know, yeah. And I had like a bunch of experiences with that, especially like I'd have to go into office hours. I'd have to ask a bunch of my friends, be like, "Hey, how am I supposed to do this?" Then I'd have to like keep like trying to like debug, keep doing that. Like I can't even tell you the amount of times I've had to stay up like at night just trying to finish those assignments. So like, yeah, like just keep practicing. Don't give up. You know, and if you really like what you're doing, no matter how hard it is, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. You know.
So the real question is, because everyone who knows a little bit about computer science, and I know a little bit of coding. I started in comp sci and as a day job do data analytics, and something you learn pretty quickly is that Stack Overflow becomes your best friend. Maybe it's ChatGPT now, but I wonder why why is that always frowned upon? Or have you had professors that encourage it? Because I remember from my experience, there were times where you're taking a closed note exam or something, and in the real world, your boss, like your experience with your internship, they don't really care that you have learned exactly what they're going to do on their job. They just care that you're someone who's teachable, hardworking, you got your degree, things like that. And then they're just going to give you their own systems, and you're just going to be expected to learn them on the job. And it's interesting how, in university settings, especially, we're taught learn it exactly this way because this is how it's going to be implemented in the real world. But that only really applies to maybe academia because in the real world, you're not going to have that. You're going to go Google stuff during your job. Like your first 2 months of onboarding might just be Googling half the stuff you don't know. It's just interesting to me how it seems to be underemphasized this idea that actually you can go online and look for answers and it's not quote unquote cheating.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, 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 you make a great point with that. Because like literally one of the first things that they teach you, I think, in computer science is literally just to know how to Google effectively, which I think is just super interesting because like, yeah, I remember my professor saying like, oh yeah, if you have an error, just look it up. If you don't know what to do, just look it up. They're like, yeah, you can figure it out from there. And like you said, Stack Overflow being your best friend, I literally had to work on a project with my internship where Stack Overflow was literally my best friend.
Mm-hmm.
I kid you not, I had so many tabs of Stack Overflow, just looking at all these of how to implement this, and this. And sometimes it's not even the right way. Like sometimes they might not give it to you the right way. So you have to look at other things. You know what I mean? But like you said, it's important that we just know that like, oh shoot, we're hardworking. No matter like what, we still able to figure it out. And that's the thing. That's the thing. Like I wish they kind of like as a university put more emphasis kind of like on the problem solving aspect of it. Because they kind of just tell you like, oh yeah, here's this assignment to do it. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, sure, like you may struggle with it and like look things up. Like I wish they kind of just taught you a little bit more about just that resilience that you need, you know? I just feel like you have to have a lot of resilience, especially when you're like doing CS. CS is one of those fields that you just can't just like do it if you don't have any type of resilience, you know?
Yeah, and I think the trends will show this that computer science seems to be, while it's broad, computer science domains seem to be this new frontier of alternative education outside of universities because you see people getting hired because they've done online Udemy courses or MITx or hell Harvard sometimes posts their entire semester's worth of CS lectures. I've seen like these universities will post it. You just won't have the diploma aspect. And those are free sometimes. So it's really fascinating to me how they really paved this frontier where look at front end code, you know, HTML, CSS, web design, things like that. People can just program their own portfolios online, and that can be part of their submission. And sometimes it's even required as a piece of your submission beyond just a resume. And it seems to be that, and rightly so, employers care a lot more about skill than they do your diploma, and they're finding different ways that are way less cost. They're way less cost to the employee. Um, they're finding these ways to allow you to show your skill that seems to me might even be better than universities sometimes because some of these are still live courses. Some of these still have instructors. You have, depending on the course and the website and what have you, maybe they focus more on the theory or they focus more on the critical thinking. Um, I don't know. It's interesting to me that that seems to be the first frontier where universities really they might not be the cream of the crop forever if they are right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, 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 absolutely. Like you make a great point with that. Again, there are like people in my office in my internship who like didn't even get like CS degrees who are working like full like web development jobs.
Mm.
And so like when you look at it that way, I just feel like the CS like job field is just growing and it's expanding. And I feel like I really like that there's a lot of different ways that people can get into the field without needing a college degree. You know what I mean? They can just do some type of certificate online or they can just do something like that, which I really like because I think that just shows like how versatile the CS, you know, this job like flow is just is, you know? It's very versatile because you can just have so many different things, different ways that you can get a job, you know, without even needing a college degree, which I think is just amazing, you know, and you can still like make bank because these people they still end up making like bank, you know. I think that's perfect. I just look at it that way, and I think that's amazing.
Absolutely. But even then, I bet you would still have to have, as you alluded to, this mindset, this motivation. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you're saying something of, like a Jonathan Haidt would say, like you have to be prepared for the road. You can't expect the road to be softened for you, right? Unpack a little bit more. What about that mindset you think is important for computer science or even anything university study or what have you at large?
I think so. Actually have a very. I feel like some of the takes I have on mindset, I think, is like super important to me. But the way I look at it is like mindset. I think is the most important thing for anything you do in your life, regardless of whether it's career, whether it's relationship, whether it's friendship, whether it's any of that stuff. Mindset, I think, for me is like hands down the most important thing. Okay, and I think for me, like I look at it a lot. I was a really big pessimist growing up as a kid. I would always think worst case scenario, worst case scenario, worst case scenario. I think as time went by, as like an adult now, I'm growing. Like I'm learning to be more of an optimist. Like I'm definitely like starting to be more on that optimistic side, but I still always like, have my pessimistic like thoughts and like sometimes my doubts. That always happens. But like I think it's important to just like remember, like even when you're struggling through those times, like just remember that like your thoughts aren't you. You know what I'm saying? Like whatever this thought is, you can't let it control like whatever's going on in your brain. And I get it. Like I even struggle with this sometimes too. So like I'm not saying I'm not perfect with it either.
Mm-hmm.
But like for me, like I just think mindset is just a super super important thing because like regardless of what it is that you're doing, if you think that you can do it, you're gonna do it. You know what I'm saying? What else is stopping you? The only thing that might be stopping you is like, oh yeah, maybe I just didn't put in enough work, right? But if you thought you could do it, you could do it, right? You may put in enough work, but if you can't, if you think you can't do it, how are you supposed to do it? You know what I'm saying? So I think like I just realized that like growing up a lot because like my parents like again like because I was a really big pessimist right as a kid. So like for me like with my parents they would always tell me they'd be like, yo, like you need not like be so pessimistic about things. Why are you thinking so negative about things? My dad would always tell me too, like your mindset, like the way you think about it, you already lose half the battle if you think you can't do it, you know? So I just think like to any like students, I guess, out there that like just keep thinking that like are just struggling with their thing, like just keep going, number one, and just have that faith that you can do it. Because if you can do it, no matter how difficult it is, you'll make it through, you know?
In your mind, what's the most important piece or pieces of that mindset? Is it the can-do attitude? Is it optimism? Is it, to steal from Carol Dweck, is it the growth mindset? Like, what actually in that mindset do you find valuable? Because it's easy to say have a good mindset, and that is useful. But what does that actually mean to you on a more granular level?
I think for me, it means a lot that like I think that growth mindset because I think you can't just have that super big positive mindset where you just think that everything is going to go great because you're kind of just putting yourself like super high up. And then if something really bad happens, it kind of just brings you all the way down here and it just sucks, right?
Right.
But it's like if you have that growth mindset where it's like, hey, maybe this thing didn't go well, but it's okay. I'm gonna keep trying. I'm gonna get better at it, you know? Or hey, maybe this thing went really well, you know? And I think I just if I can build on it, I can be really great at it too. You know, it's just having that mindset that like is like, oh yeah, like maybe things didn't go my way, or maybe if things did go my way, to just keep pushing, you know? It kind of humbles you, I think, in a sense. And I think that's like a really important thing as well. I don't know, you tell me, like what do you think is probably the most important? Like, do you think it's the optimist? Do you think it's the growth mindset? What do you think?
I think I don't think it's just optimism. Although people tend to call me an optimist, I think I have a positive interpretation on realism. You might want to call it. But to your point, being totally optimistic is not the answer because then you, in my opinion, can easily ignore problems, right? You can say, oh, there are real problems in the world, starving people, countries that are struggling, wars, right? That's real, and hopefully it's not forever, but it seems to be going to be here for a while. And if you're just an optimist, you can say, oh, well, actually, it's not a big deal. Everything's fine. That, in some ways, invalidates the experiences of so many people who are suffering, right? So I'm not a pure optimist in that sense. However, I do subscribe to the idea of a growth mindset, as you do. I like to think of it as learning from failure. For whatever reason, there is a little bit of a masochistic appreciation I have for failing because every time I failed something, I learned what not to do. Or I learned actually it's going to take more work than I expected. Or I learned this business partner they're my best friend, and it turns out there's a reason you don't start businesses with your best friend. Whatever that thing is. Maybe I'm learning how to set boundaries or whatever. I think that is the best mindset to have. But even then, people can get lost in the can do attitude. I found times where I just assumed I could do anything, right? That's just how I was raised. I'm very grateful for that upbringing, this idea that you can do literally anything you put your mind to, and I love it. The problem is what happens when you start to associate people's expectations of you with your success. That whether it's your parents, whether it's society, whether it's the status quo, right? This idea that, oh, I'm going to be this kind of engineer and get this kind of grade, and I'm going to work this kind of 9 to 5, and then I'm going to die with $1 million in my retirement, and I'm going to have lived a good life. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with stability. If you end up with kids really young, you want that safety net. But for me, it's a lot more about exploration, knowing that you could do anything you put your mind to, even if it takes you several times failing. But you also have to consider the fact that should you be doing everything you're doing, do you have to be trying to do every single thing you've put your mindset into? And for a lot of people, they're going to realize, even the most optimistic can-do people, they might have to realize, oh, I can do all this, but was it worth wasting my high school to be valedictorian? I don't know. Was it? You tell me. Maybe to you it was. Maybe it wasn't a waste. Maybe it gave you this explosion of curiosity. But that's a really personal, decision. So, but to your actual question, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that growth mindset is really important, and generally speaking, having a can-do attitude for sure.
Absolutely. And I want to like go back to that point that you made with
Mm-hmm.
the associating other people's opinions of success with yours.
Mm-hmm.
Because growing up in an Indian family, for me, like that aspect is just huge.
Sure.
Like there's so many expectations I feel like that our parents have of us. They always tell you like, oh yeah, you should be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. Like these are the three job descriptions that they want their kids to have: either doctor, lawyer, engineer. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like there's so many Indian kids out there that want to do other things like that, things that actually make them happy, and like their parents like overlook them, and their parents are just like, yeah, like. And but I think, to me personally, I think like if you want to do that stuff, go for it. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like you go for it. Like sure, you in your parents' mind, they might not consider you successful, but I think like for me at least, I think like real success is you just doing something that makes you happy, and
Mm-hmm.
you're just happy in your life. You know what I'm saying? Who cares what other people have to think about it? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I preach that because like I know there's a bunch of like, I guess, people out there that are like trying to like live really high to all these other expectations of other people's version of success. But I think they need to like also remember deep down, like, what is their version of success? You know what I mean? What is something that they think is successful? Because if they're successful at the end of the day, they don't need to worry about what anyone else has to say about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I cannot remember the quote. Please tell me what it is if you remember it. But it's something in the order of, when you're in your 20s, you care a lot about yourself. When you're in your 40s, you think everyone else cares about you. And then by the time you retire, you realize no one cared about you in the first place. Something like that. Um, and I think, I mean, I can't personally attest to how true that is, but it bums me out thinking about, yeah, all the atrocities and things in the world, but also all the people who had opportunities and could have lived the life they wanted, and had parents who, even if they were pressuring them to do one of three careers, probably were doing it out of love for their kids, wanting their kids to be successful. Hope, best case scenario, that's why they were doing it. But even then, you still have to consider, well, what happens when I live that life? Live the life of someone else, through me. The most clear example of that outside of career choice, you see it in sports all the time, right? You see a dad who, if you saw him at the YMCA, he'd say he would have made the league, but he blew out his kneecap. But of course, he's going to be yelling at his kid 9 to 5, 6 days a week to be in the NBA. And there's only, what, 300 people who make the NBA, who have ever made the NBA, some astronomically small number. And it's, it just bums me out to think that people are living someone else's lives and not being able to reach what the peak of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy, the self-actualization, right? Um, you know, that's a beautiful thing that I think the 21st century, with its technology and its wealth that could feed everyone on Earth, I think that's something we should really be striving for.
I agree. I totally agree with everything you just said because like I just think that like yo, like people shouldn't pressure like other people like their like kids with like their with a certain expectation that they have, and I feel like they should also remember too that like yo, if they're doing what they're doing, if it makes them happy, why do they need to worry, right?
Right.
Like I preach that so much because I think for me growing up, I always had that experience where like
Hmm.
oh yeah, like I always like not that I was pressured into doing anything because I really like the stuff that I'm doing right now, but it's like
Hmm.
in a lot of aspects like I know if I had chosen a different career path, maybe my parents wouldn't be like as supportive about it.
Right.
And like, and so when I look at it that way, I'm like, I preach that like, if there's a career path or something that you want to do, but if you have these people saying like, oh yeah, you're not going to make it, you're not going to do it, like just go for it. What do you have to lose at the end of the day? You know what I mean? Maybe you might go
Exactly.
out and be this amazing, like, but you might be the next LeBron James. You know what I mean? Like, go for it. Why not? You never know. You know, you never know until you try. You know, and I really like that quote. I like I don't know. You remind me what it is, but it's like he's like I think it's like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I don't know if that's the
Right.
quote, if that's what
Wayne
it is.
Gretzky. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Like that quote. When I look at that quote, I look at that quote whenever I'm scared because I realize to me that I'm like, oh shit, like that's a scary. Like I'm scared, right, to do this one thing. But then when I see that quote, it makes me realize, yo, if I don't try, I'm never gonna know, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I remember a similar quote. I think it was Michael Jordan. He was asked about how he's made, I don't know, however many buzzer beaters in his career, 30 or 50, whatever it was. He was like, yeah, but I also missed four times more than that. But you only have the chance to make them if you shoot the ball, something like that. And it's, as I've gotten older, and I'm still pretty young, but the older I get, the more I appreciate that a lot of people are making their decisions for themselves as well as for their kids, because a lot of parents view their kids as an extension of themselves, and rightly so. Their decisions made out of fear, right? Because if you say you're an immigrant family and you want your kids to have the better life in the capitalist world than you did, because let's say you worked extra hours, now you want your kids to make six figures and be happy, whatever that means to you. Your decision for them to force them, if you will, into engineering or law or being a doctor, that's based out of fear, right? It might not be that you're just some really angry, bitter person who likes yelling at their kids to get status. I mean, there are people like that, but I bet a lot of it is I want you to have that good life, and I'm going to project onto you how I think you can do that best. And so I bet it's, to empathize with parents a little bit. I bet it's difficult to be able to take that step back and say, look, you're doing what you think is best for you, and I'm going to support you regardless. Here's my suggestions, right? I mean, I'm not a life coach, but I'm sure that's difficult for a lot of parents.
You know, I mean, that's actually a great point. I didn't even think about it that way, but that's actually a really great point. It does come from fear because a lot of like these parents, I think they're just worried to see their kids kind of just be in a place maybe that they were in,
Right?
maybe at one point in their lives. And I think when you look at it that way, right, it makes you kind of empathize with the parents a little bit more. It makes you realize, oh shoot, like maybe like you kind of see where they're coming from, definitely. And
Right.
that's a great point again because I never really thought about it that way. That like it
Hmm.
comes from fear because it does come from fear. It comes from a lot of fear, and I think that like I think just sometimes if parents can just take a step back and realize, hey, if this is what my kid is doing and if this is what's best for them, I'm going to support them at the end of the day, right? But like
Right.
you said, you can always give tips and suggestions. There's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, you should still be a parent. I mean, I think the world would be a worse place if every kid just didn't have parents. Like, I'm not saying that for sure. But yeah, it's definitely easier to empathize. It doesn't mean you have to change your mind, but it does mean you can at least understand where people are coming from. I mean, I'm a firm believer, and you probably know this already, but I'm a firm believer that if the world could just empathize with each other a little more, and then maybe get rid of some social media algorithms that are locking us in our gridlock, then we would be so much better off. It's amazing. I think about the people always think about the American political spectrum, right, left to right. And I had a geography teacher in high school. He called it a horseshoe, and I just take it a step further. I think of it as a circle. You go far enough to either extreme, you end up agreeing. And it's funny. I always thought that was just kind of a theoretical thing, but I've met people who who self-ascribed they're self-ascribed anarcho-communists. So right where communism and anarchy meet at the end of the political spectrum. Don't ask me to explain the logic or the philosophy, but fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. It's like, man, if that person can exist this has proved to me that like the far right and far left can get along. Combine that with the fact that people don't realize this. The biggest political party in America is not Republican or Democrat. It's independent or not registered, and by a landslide. People just tend to lean right or left. Most people are in the middle. So, not to get on a tangent, but I'm a firm believer that if we could just empathize with humans a little more, accept that we're all just human beings, man, we'd kick some ass.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I always preach being an open-minded person, I think,
Mm.
and keeping an open mind towards anything really going on. And I just think I feel like I find that just like when you keep your mind open, you find it easier to just like have these conversations, with people that have just different viewpoints and different perspectives
Hmm.
about things, I feel like when you have a closed mind, it's very hard for you to take in other people's perspectives, and I think like that's a super important thing for me. Like I preach that a lot because like I love hearing other people's perspectives. Like what you just said with the fear of the parents. I never looked at it that way, but that's a great point. Like that's an excellent point because like parents are really just scared.
Hmm.
They fear that maybe your life might be something of what theirs was maybe when they were younger, and they just don't want you to have that, right? Right. So like
Yeah.
I'm always open to like just hearing these like new perspectives because like I never thought about things in that way. When you look at it in that way, it makes you realize, oh shoot, like dang, that's really cool. You know?
Right.
I love that, and I love that, and I love that. Like that's especially like I think everyone has their differences. We're all different people, but if we just find a way to just look at see the way that people think things and see the way that people approach things, to me, I just think we just be a more accepting world.
Hmm.
Because we have a bunch of hate in our world right now, and I really don't like that. Because there's so many things that we could be more accepting about. I feel like, and just I preach like open mindedness a lot because I just think if you're open minded, it's very hard for you to shut someone out.
Yeah, you don't have to be so open-minded that your brain falls out, but you can still always be willing to supplement what you already know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sad irony, and I've said this before, that the things that if you ask people on an anonymous survey, they would say are the most important to them, like their core tenets of what matters to them. They'll either say their religious belief and their values, or they'll say their political belief and what democracy and freedom, or the other side of that, what they value, or they'll say financial success and being happy and secure. Those three things. Tell me if you hear this ever. Politics, religion, and money. At least in America and maybe in the world, those are the three things you're not supposed to talk about. And I've made lots of people really uncomfortable because I always talk about it. I mean, of course, if I'm in the middle of a meeting with my boss and we're talking about something specific to the job, I'm not just going to say, "Oh, what do you think about Jesus?" Like that's not going to happen. But day to day, if I'm just like going out to have a drink or grab lunch with someone or whatever, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to be respectful and kind, but like that's if we all can agree those are the most important things, and we all agree that we can't agree on the important things, and we all agree that conversation should be important, then if you just connect the dots, congratulations, you've drawn a picture.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, and like just preaching that open mindedness to the point where you can
Yeah.
just understand everyone's viewpoint. Again, you don't have to agree. I'm not saying you got to agree with what
Hmm.
anyone says, right? We can agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, it's important that we hear everyone's point out, right?
Oh yeah, I'll take it to an extreme. I'm a firm believer you can't fully disagree with someone unless you understand them because you don't really know what you're disagreeing with.
That is true. That is true. But can't you say it in the same way then with agreeing? Is that a possibility? You can't fully agree with anyone?
Yeah, not until you understand them. I agree. That's why I think understanding is so important, right? You can't really fully agree with someone unless you know what you're agreeing with. Now, we have heuristics, right, in politics, like, oh, you're a Democrat, so you pick the one with the D next to it all the way down the list, or you're a Republican, you circle in the R every time. So there are these heuristics, but no, I'm a firm believer. You have to understand people to agree or disagree with them, and that's not to say I'm pretty strongly against relativism. We don't have to get into it, but I had a conversation about moral relativism. I'm actually pretty strongly opposed to that, but I only feel that way knowing that you can disagree with someone if you understand what they think. If you can steel man someone's case and be like, okay, you believe X, Y, and Z and you haven't misrepresented them, only then can you really disagree with them because at least you know what you're disagreeing with. And that's a good thing because at least you understand each other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm wondering then, you talked a lot about motivation and we've talked a lot about, what drives you, how to have a good life, happiness. But what else is happiness Is that your end goal? Do you have another end goal in mind? Is it happiness, or is there something else that you think is the ultimate end goal for you or for everybody?
Mhm. Yeah, that's another great question. I really like, for me, I think happiness is a big goal for me. I think for me, the biggest thing is I've always been, ever since I was a kid, just wanting to help people and just thinking about a way that I can just make the world a better place. I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just being able to figure out a way that I can make the world a better place. And like I always preach like this, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there that are just like, oh yeah, like I need to do this with my life. I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. You know, they have this whole agenda kind of like of what they need to
Mm-hmm.
do, what they need to do. Right. And like I get it, because I was once like that too. Right. But I feel like they also need to remember too that like life happens. Like you, not everything that you have. And I think when you look at it that way, it kind of just makes you enjoy the little moments a little bit more, because it makes you realize, oh shoot, like I got to enjoy this little moment a little bit more, because I never know what's gonna happen next. You know what I mean, in my life. And I just think just being able to figure out some way to like kind of just help like make the world a better place. And I think the way that I preach it is kind of just doing small, like a small actions. You know what I mean? Whether it's just, you know, holding the door open for a random person. You know, like you never know. Maybe that could be making someone's day. You know, someone could be having a really shitty day, and if you like, you know, like you hold the door open for them, or if maybe if it's just, you know, um offering something that you have to like a homeless person, you know, something like that. Again, we don't have to, like the way I look at it is like it doesn't have to be an astronomical step, right? But if it's just a step that's big enough to kind of just make some type of an impact, then I feel like I'm doing the right thing then, right? That's the way I look at it.
Let's psychoanalyze a bit. What do you think causes you to have that perspective? What is it in your life, or what influences have you had maybe that have led you to this point where you're passionate about helping other people. You're passionate about living life in a way to where you can respect those around you and those little day-to-day, acts of kindness as we're all taught as kids. How do you think you came to this point?
I think I just look at my, probably my parents, honestly. I'm not gonna lie. My parents, so we go to the temple like pretty often.
Mm.
Like, we go, I think, like every Saturday, basically. And one of the priests there, like I remember there's a time where one of the priests there, he basically like he didn't have like, he was living in a hotel essentially, and he just did not have a ride home, and it was pretty late. It was like, I think it was like 10, 11 ish. Obviously, like you can call an Uber if you want, but like my parents just like, yeah, we'll offer like take you. Like we like my parents, like they just ended up driving them all the way like the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like acts like that. Like my parents didn't even know who this guy was, you know? But they still offered to just help him out like that. So I think just like looking at how my parents were, and kind of just seeing those like aspects that they do to help people, regardless, even if they don't know who they are. You know what I mean? Helping just a stranger, I think, because when I look at it that way, just for me, I think like I just think to myself, I'm like, oh, okay, like I really want to like, you know, do that, because like, you know, because it first of all, like it's good to help people. I think it's really important, and I think it's just, you never know, you could be making someone's day. And I think when you look at it that way, like it helps you realize, oh shoot, like maybe it's worth it then, you know, because you could be helping someone out who's in a really tough position, you know. And I feel like as a society, we need to preach more, like you said, being more empathetic, number one, and just being able to, you know, just help people out, you know, because I mean, the world is, it's only getting more cruel by the day, you know. So
Right.
it's just important, I think, just for us to be able to figure out some kind of way to just give back.
I love that mindset. And in one hand, although you're never as good as you think you are, I'd like to think I value it the same way. This idea of just, oh, someone dropped something, be the person to pick it up for them. You know what I mean? Um, but I still wonder, because you seem to have thought about these things quite a bit. I wonder, do you have a grand purpose in your mind? You live day to day. Is your purpose to live day to day? Because what if an emergency happened, you passed away next week, right? To be happy with the life you lived. Is that kind of your perspective, or do you think there is an end goal, a larger goal of yours, that these little acts of kindness add up to? What is that perspective of yours, if you have that really thought through?
No, that's a great point. I think definitely when I was younger, it was more day to day. I was more
Mm.
thinking about, oh yeah, maybe this day, the next day, the next day, next day. I think as I got older, I realized I want to build it up to like some big thing in the future. I think I've noticed just I'm a very future minded person. and I get very anxious a lot about the future, which is why
Sure.
I stress out a lot, you know? And I just think for me, like, I really want to, like, at one point open my own charity,
Hmm.
I think, at one point in my life. And I really want to, like, help out the homeless people. I think for me, like, just create my own charity, help out the homeless people in any way that I can. Because I've heard some stories about some charities that were just not great,
Right.
to some of the people, right? I don't know too much about it, but I just know that they weren't like they just didn't treat them well. And I want to be able to make sure that like when I open this charity, that like all the people are like taken care of and and like they're helped out, Because again, like I empathize a lot with those people, with those homeless people, because I just know that they're living a struggling life, and if there's anything that I can do to help them out, I might as well. Like I really watch like I don't know if you know this YouTuber. Do you know FaZe Rug at all?
Yes, I've heard the name.
Yeah. Yeah. So like he on his YouTube channel, he makes like videos about like he made like a few videos about like him helping out like this homeless man.
Mm.
He found a homeless guy and he just like helped him out like a lot. He even gave this guy like a hotel for like a week, stuff like that. He like took this guy on a shopping spree, kind of just like fixed him up a little bit. Like doing that kind of stuff I think is just amazing. Like I like going watching that kind of stuff like inspires me because I'm like, oh shoot, like that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, and I've become a bit more cynical about it. Not that I think I'm cynical about kindness in any way, but about the structures and the institutions that are often utilized to be kind. For example, you know, all it takes is you know a natural disaster in Haiti for the UN to just wreck local governments because they refuse to leave. All it takes is for 10 million views on a YouTube video for you to give out of the quote unquote kindness of your heart to a homeless person. You know what I mean? So it's really hard to find that balance of how can I best serve the communities that I value. And it sounds like homelessness might be the one, for you. How can you best serve that community without getting lost in all of the pressures of, you know, paying nonprofit, executives high margins when they're supposed to be working on a nonprofit, right? It's things like that. It's difficult, right? It's not easy, I'm sure, to live a life like that where you really have to humble yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then like going back to that point, like that's a very good point. Like, because I mean like you said, there's multiple ways that people think to like give back and give in any sense. Like for me, definitely it's homelessness, but like for a bunch of other people, there's a bunch of other aspects that they really like to like go and help out, which I think is just it's super interesting. And I'm just curious, is there any aspect for you that you really have where you would like are thinking about?
Yeah, well, I'm big on education, and everyone says that very broadly. But if I were to narrow it down, I would say critical thinking and self-reflection. Those are unfortunately really hard to define. Like you can see critical thinking, like when you see it, you recognize it, right? Like, oh, this person A took them to B, B took them to C. It can't be D. It's kind of like your if you've ever taken test questions for like an LSAT or something like that for law school, they're kind of critical thinking based. The science portion of the ACT is very critical thinking heavy. How can you best draw conclusions with the information you have, right? I'm a firm believer that this kind of thinking would benefit us in every domain, potentially even including homelessness. Because some homelessness is, I mean, there's obviously, it's going to be multifaceted and complex, right? There's going to be veterans who, they don't have good enough VA benefits, which the politics is always fascinating. As a quick aside, I remember when there was some kind of bill proposed by Democrats that was going to help fund veterans, but then since a Democrat proposed it, Republicans just refused to pass it, and then they just got demolished by their base, and rightly so. You can't let politics get in the way. But yeah, so to that point, I think every facet of our society now and in the future, with education being critical thinking education, understanding empathy as well as understanding the logic of day-to-day life, you allow yourself to live better, however you want to define that. So happier, more free, more curious, more thoughtful, with conclusions that make sense. I mean, look at basically every family that's ever existed. There's going to be some uncle who shows up to your Halloween party and then pisses everyone off, right? Because he just has to yell at everyone for being Democrats or something, right? That's just once you can have a society where most people don't view the world so narrowly, where most people they retain the curiosity that we all had as kids. It wasn't just it wasn't bred out of them, if you it wasn't trained out of them because of social norms. In a world where everyone keeps these kind of let's love each other and be curious and be thoughtful, I think that's a world where no matter what happens, no matter what algorithms are at play, no matter what corporation thinks it's trying to make the best, most addictive products it can, I think that's a world where we still survive and we flourish. So to answer your question more succinctly, yeah, education, critical thinking education, and self reflection and empathy, I think are really the future. Being able to treat people as individuals, regardless of statistics. Not that I ignore statistics, that's not the case. But yeah, I really think that education piece is huge. But that's still so broad. If I wanted to make any actionable change, right, as you're probably grappling with, how do I actually help homeless people? Do I just give them a bunch of money and a bunch of houses? Well, we saw that didn't really work in the West Coast, right? How do I fix education? Become a trillionaire and then just sell all my stock and then just give all K through 12 a ton of money? Does that solve anything? So it matters how you turn that into actionable insights, which I'm sure I'll be stuck on for the next 5 decades. You know what I mean?
No, I get you. I get you. I get it because I love that like what you were saying with that because again I have never really looked at it that way with the critical thinking, but like
Mm-hmm.
that is an excellent point because it kind of goes back to the open mindedness thing that we talked about a little bit earlier, right? It's like kind of just preaching that in education that like, oh, we can meet people that are kind of have different viewpoints as us, but if we're narrow minded we can't accept that, you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that that's such an excellent point to prove out because it kind of does start there with all
Mm-hmm.
kind of like the hate, right? Like if you look at a lot of the hate that we have in the world, it kind of just starts because we can't really accept any of those other people's viewpoints and opinions, right?
Right.
Think about it. If we could accept all those viewpoints, like you said, we'd be in a much better place right now, right? And so like I love that idea that you preach there because like if we can start teaching that young, that just makes it so much better, you know?
Yeah, and it's irrational. I mean, it's irrational not to at least try to understand people's mindsets because the only reason we have our mindsets, I mean, I'm a firm believer in this, is because of what we're exposed to as kids. Yeah, there's a genetic role, but I'm confident it's at least half, socialized. I mean, kids aren't born racist. I mean, they've done studies of white and black babies, and they love to play together, because they're just babies, right? And so this idea that once we recognize that our kids have a belief largely because we told them to, or even if we were very thoughtful and didn't tell them to, maybe they were just exposed to it and were inclined to believe it. Well, once you recognize that, there's no reason to say, I have some kind of moral superiority over you, right? I mean, you can make moral arguments, right, about what's right and what's wrong and all those kinds of things, but this implicit superiority because I think it, therefore I'm right, it doesn't. There's no bridge there, right? And I think we just need to get over that mindset. And if we can start at kids realizing that, oh, I believe what I believe because my parents said so. Oh, and you believe what you believe because your parents said so. And then let's team up, understand each other, and try to figure out what's the most true. That's such a flourishing society. I can only imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, again, like excellent point with that. Like again, going back to that, I never thought about it that way with the critical thinking, but like when you mentioned that's an excellent point because like I said earlier, preaching young is just great, and then just understanding that hey, we can have some differences, but let's meet in the middle about it.
Yeah.
Let's not have to hate each other's viewpoints on a specific thing, right? And I think that's just something we just really need to preach a lot to our society nowadays. Like it really just it irritates me sometimes seeing this stuff happen because like it's such a sad thing, because I feel like if people just come with that like empathy in their hearts and just understand that like hey, they have a different mindset than us, they have a different viewpoint than us, and that's okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
again, we're all different people, we all came from different backgrounds, we're not always going to have all the same mindset, you know what I mean? And I just think because of that, like I just think that that's a super important, I guess, aspect to have, especially to preach young, because if we can start from young and we can start from the younger generation and keep working our way up, it's only going to get better than as the future goes by, which I think is just excellent.
Exactly. Yeah, I firmly believe that hate is largely preventable, whether it's preventing it from, as we just said, teaching kids how to empathize with those around you, whether it's preventing it, in my belief, from not, forcing dogmatic, principles on kids or even adults for that matter. Um, you know, a lot of this strikes me as preventable, and I hope society gets there. We're young. We think we have it all figured out. We've only had the Industrial Revolution around for a couple, it's only been a couple centuries since then. So we have so much growth as a society um, to do as long as we don't kill ourselves in the process. Because unfortunately, as we all learned from that Oppenheimer movie coming out, that we learned how to blow ourselves up a little too soon in the evolutionary history.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. But like you said, we're very young, right? So we have a lot of opportunities for us to grow. And I feel like that's kind of the beauty, I think, about like being young. You know what I mean? Is you kind of have the ability to kind of just make mistakes and just grow from it. You know what I mean? Because I feel like when you're older, you don't really have the chance to do that. You know, when you're older, you kind of have to seem like you figure everything out. You have to know all your stuff. You know, but I think like the beauty of you being young is just you knowing how to make mistakes and just knowing what you learn from those mistakes and just keep growing. Right? Like I have a friend who just like preaches his like biggest mindset is him just saying everything happens for a reason.
Hmm.
Right? And like when you look at it that way, like yeah, everything does happen for a reason. Right? And like I just think when like when you're younger, like I think it's an excellent kind of mindset to use because like it's okay, like I made a mistake, but it happened for a reason. What was the reason? You may not know, but like you'll find out later on, right?
Yeah.
And it helps you grow. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing.
No, that's a good mindset to have, and I mean, I'm a believer. You can even separate that from religious teaching and things like that. Although some people definitely use that as the facet to to teach those morals. Um, but let me ask you this then: at your stage in life, particularly as someone who's thought about some of these things, thinking about the future a lot, maybe stressing over it a little too much, but how do you, if you were to give one final word of advice, what would that be? I know you have a lot of life ahead of you, so do I. But for someone, let's say in your situation at your age, what advice do you have for someone who's coming of that age?
Coming of my age. Oh, just honestly, never give up. I think that's probably the best piece of advice that I could give because there are so many times where I think, especially as like the younger generation, where they want to give up, they may have passed a lot of obstacles in their way. You know, just never give up. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter. Um, it doesn't matter about any of that stuff. What matters is how hard you work and how much effort you put into the thing that you want to do, and you'll be great. You know what I mean? No one cares who you're from. No one cares about who you are. People just want to see how much work you're gonna put in. You know. And
Absolutely.
I think that's the biggest thing is just to preach that like, hey, I know things might get tough, but think about it. Like when you're older, you'll be telling your kids this story. You know, you're telling them how you got through it, right? And I think when you look at it that way, it just kind of motivates you to, hey, like I know things right now might be hard, but if I don't give up, I can figure it out, right? What is your opinion about that one? What would you preach to someone who's your age? What is your message?
Absolutely. Thanks for turning it back on me. I will say, well, I'm glad you're curious because what I was going to say is you should always be curious. I think I'm a firm believer that curiosity is the mechanism for which you can do a lot of things. For example, empathize. You can empathize with those you disagree with or you agree with because you are curious enough to learn about them, right? Curiosity is what allows you to be an engineer. You can be the person who sees what can I innovate here? This is just a bunch of numbers and formulas I was given, but how can I use this to really create something beautiful? Curiosity, it allows you to discover what you believe. I mean, you only get, call it 80 years on earth, sometimes more, sometimes a whole lot less. Well, I want to figure out what it means to be human, what it means to believe in something, what my values are, and those can change, right? But I want to have a general direction, a general path to follow. And if you're not, you know, bestowed upon you any level of curiosity, then you don't have any motivator, any inclination to do that. You just,
Right. Yeah.
with no offense intended, you just wade through your life. And that bums me out. I'd love to see people being able to figure out who they are, who they want to be, what the best version of themselves can look like, and how they can learn from all those around them. And I'm a firm believer that through, as I said, critical thinking education, which is the foundation that allows you to understand the world in your brain, and then with the mechanism of that understanding being curiosity, this inquisitive mindset that allows you to be exposed to things that you could then understand critically and learn from, and things like that.
Yeah. And again, like, I love that you keep bringing up things that I never think about because this really is opening my mind. Because, like, again, like the curiosity aspect, never looked at it that way. But you're
Mm.
right. If we are curious about these kind of things, it can only make us grow, right? Because if you're curious to understand another person's perspective, like you said, it helps you understand it better and it comes from a place of love and not hate, right? And like you said, like as an engineer, we have to be curious, right? Because not only are we making a product, but we also want to see if we can make that product better, you know?
Yeah,
And so like
yeah,
that's an excellent way of like looking at it because like always being curious allows you to put your best work in and it allows you to keep growing.
Absolutely. And you can't force, even if you are someone who's been exposed to other people's beliefs. People often think,
Yeah.
oh, if you're exposed to somebody, you'll start to be nicer to them or understand them more. And there's some truth to that. But more so, if you're exposed to it and you're, let's just use your language, open-minded, right? If you're curious enough to be willing to learn, to be willing to receive, right? People always say, you know, therapy doesn't help the person who isn't willing to learn a little bit about themselves, right? Or whatever. That applies to every industry. That applies to every facet of life. So if you don't have that, what I'm calling curiosity, or as what you call open-mindedness, then even if you're exposed to people who you disagree with, or even people you agree with, but in different ways, you can't really learn from them until you allow yourself. And I just think curiosity is that mechanism that allows that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that aspect. I mean, curiosity is what fuels any aspect of your life. You know what I mean? And it's just like you said, going back to mindset, having that right mindset for it. Because at the end of the day, you can be curious, but if you ain't got that mindset, you ain't gonna get anything done. So it's just, I think mindset, hands down, is probably the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
So I guess we gotta finish by saying that curiosity is not what killed the cat.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, I mean, and that's a great message that you're preaching, by the way, with like the curiosity
like,
to always be curious. Because I just, again, I've never looked at it that way, but like when you put it into perspective, it really opens my eyes because it's like, yo, it's important to be curious. It's important to be curious to help you understand other people better. It's important to be curious to help you do your go day to day life to do it better. You know,
absolutely,
I think that's
absolutely.
an excellent message. You know,
Well, I appreciate it, and more importantly, I appreciate you chatting with me today. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving a bit of a rundown on cybersecurity, and then really delving in with me deep on the motivation and the psychology
so of
of it
course,
all.
thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I always wanted to be on a podcast, and I freaking love it. Like this is amazing.
Absolutely. All right, appreciate you, brother.
All right, yeah, appreciate it, man.